GOSO. What is GOSO? It is the golden concept of get out, stay out, which is what every victim of our kind ought to apply to his or her situation. Whether you have realized that you have been ensnared by a narcissist or you now realize that this particular person is an abuser, GOSO is always applicable. Those who have not been caught up in an entanglement with our kind may well regard this as blindingly obvious. Of course, what they don't realize is that GOSO has two formidable enemies, us and yourself. Thus, applying GOSO is far harder than they realize. Of these two enemies, it is evident why we are the first one. We regard you as our property. No matter where you sit in the fuel matrix, from non-intimate tertiary source to intimate partner primary source, you belong to us, and you are there to serve the fulfillment of the prime aims. The higher your status in the fuel matrix, the greater the effort that will be applied to keep you in place. You will be fully familiar with many of the various manipulations we use to ensure that you go nowhere and remain in situ. Our devil's toolkit is used to make sure that you are compliant, pumping out fuel and under our control. This control is often substantial. However, you start to recognize the manipulations. You learn about gaslighting, triangulation, word salad, and so on, and begin to see when these are used. You begin to realize that you should not be treated in this way, and with your increased understanding, you begin to loosen the grip that we have on you. You begin to see matters in a different light. You now see an abuser, a narcissist stood before you, and not the person you once thought that we were. Your resolve increases. Your determination solidifies as you realize that you need to remove yourself from our toxic influence. You know what you are dealing with now. It is time to get out. However, there is a second enemy that has loomed into view. You. You are your own enemy, or more specifically, your emotional thinking is. You know you need to get out. Getting out may be the clear act of ending the formal relationship, moving out of a property, or moving us out, implementing no contact, and that is the ultimate aim. Sometimes it is getting out of the abusive environment even though you cannot implement no contact. But you are getting out of the influence and detrimental behavior that you have endured for so long. Whichever one it is, you realize it is time to get out. It is then that this second enemy of emotional thinking strikes. Emotional thinking is a con artist. Its sole aim to ensure that your addiction to us is fed. Emotional thinking doesn't have your interests at heart, although it will pretend that it does. You are trying to remove yourself from one con artist just as another appears, although this one is just as hard to spot as our kind. Your emotional thinking wants to always be your first response in any situation concerning our kind, because it wants to ensure that you keep feeding the addiction to us. This means that you have to keep engaging with us, thinking about us, seeing us, doing things for us. By remaining within our influence, the addiction remains fed, and emotional thinking will do whatever it can to maintain that situation. Emotional thinking is your enemy in this situation. It has no interest in the fact that your self-confidence has vanished, that you are utterly exhausted, that you are confused, that you are nursing a broken arm, that you are bleeding money, that your sense of self is evaporating, that you have lost your friends, that your job is suffering and 100 other misfortunes. All it cares about is ensuring that you do not get out. By stopping this happening, the addiction is fed. Accordingly, this sly and devious emotional thinking will occupy your thoughts as quickly as it can in order to keep cool, hard logic at bay. Unfortunately for you, it does this with considerable ease because, 1. You are unlikely to fully understand what is happening at this juncture when you recognize the need to get out. 2. You have been repeatedly conditioned by our manipulations to Embrace emotional thinking, utilizing flawed logic, so that it is not always the immediate response when you are making decisions. 3. Your ability to cope will have been reduced. Emotional thinking offers you an easy option, but not the right option. And when you are ground down, this has considerable appeal. Think of it this way. When you're tired, is it easier to start cooking a meal from scratch or order a takeaway? It's the latter, but that isn't exactly good for you. So what's the consequence? Your logical thinking tells you, this person is bad for me, I need to get out. But before logical thinking can add anything else, your emotional thinking surges because it's the dominant point at this juncture and drowns out logic, and instead fills your mind with what it wants you to think. Indeed, so significant is this emotional thinking that it becomes your only way of thinking and takes over in terms of what you do. Emotional thinking is governing you, and because it is, you are unable to see that it is. It removes your insight. That is why you often look back and think, what the hell was I thinking? Who was that person? That wasn't me. That is in effect because you were placed on autopilot by your emotional thinking. And you took a course of action without realizing the impact of it. You were using flawed logic because your logical thinking couldn't get a look in. How does this emotional thinking manifest? It is devious, as I mentioned, because what it does is masquerade as something which is linked to your empathic traits, so it convinces you that you are doing something that's actually good and the right thing to do. This is the manifestation of flawed logic. It's all part of its conning nature. Thus, when you have that brief moment of logic and decide that you need to get out, emotional thinking, because it's higher and more dominant because you've been feeding it through entry into the 5 arenas of interaction, it becomes alerted and realizes that there is danger to the addiction being fed. It then surges and manifests in many different ways, such as, but if I leave, how will he be able to manage? I'll feel bad for him. This corrupts your empathic traits of compassion and decency and honesty. Logic would say, why be concerned about how he will manage? He's never been concerned about how you have managed. You do not have to be responsible for this person. Get out. Yet logic is unheard. Your emotional thinking is too strong. Emotional thinking will say, but what if he can change? He said he will get therapy, and he has made an appointment. What if I go and miss out on him changing for the better? This then corrupts the traits of the desire to fix and the desire to heal, and also the empathic trait of compassion. And it is also a form of manipulation. Hope. Logic would say to you, he is a narcissist. He will not change. He cannot change. You have no need to stay. Get out. Yet logic is unheard, drowned out by your strong emotional thinking. Emotional thinking will say, now isn't a good time. It's his birthday, or her mother has just died, or he has a big project at work, he isn't well. This, again, is the corruption of your empathic traits of compassion, honesty, and decency. Logic would say to you, now is the right time. He spoiled your birthday. She didn't care when your father died. He's never supported your work. She never looked after you when you were unwell. You deserve better. Get out. Yet, logic is unheard. Here are some further examples of the emotional thinking which stops you getting out. Are any familiar? What would logical thinking be telling you in response if it was heard? I don't have anywhere to go and I like living in this house. But what if the children want to see him and that upsets them? I am frightened of what he will do to me. He said if I ever left him, he would post those videos and pictures on the internet. I don't want to feel like I have failed and given up on us. I know she is seeing someone else. What if I go and they end up happy together? Why should I give them a clear run at a relationship together? But I still love her. She needs my help. I cannot walk away from someone who is needing help. She hasn't got anybody else but me. It will be too hard to do it. I just need to find a way of making him happy instead. What will I do for money? He controls it all. I will be destitute. I'm scared to date again. What will people think, though, if I go? It will make him look bad at work and to his friends, and they'll think even worse of me. It could be worse. I mean, she is wonderful sometimes, and the sex is amazing. I can put up with it for the good times, surely. I'm getting old, and I don't want to start all over again. I would go, but I have to stay for the sake of the children. I'm not giving up. You have to fight sometimes to save a relationship, and I am a fighter. I just have to love him more. Love will save the day. It has to. Your emotional thinking will use fear, guilt, hope, dedication, valiance, selflessness, status, loyalty, and more besides to make you stay and derail your attempt to get out. It will corrupt your empathic and narcissistic traits such as honesty, decency, compassion, being an excellent listener, justice, the desire to fix and to heal, pride, anger, argumentativeness, to keep you in situ, to keep you stuck, so that you remain with the narcissist and feed the addiction. What you must do is pay heed to these examples and recognize emotional thinking when it is happening. You will then allow logic an opportunity to make itself heard. Go back and listen to those examples of emotional thinking, and then with each one, apply the logic to it. Of course, when logic makes itself heard, emotional thinking will fight back. But the more you engage in recognizing this emotional thinking and reducing it through the application of your no-contact regime, the easier it becomes until you will start to realize that you are adopting emotional thinking, and then you will shift to the application of logic. And if you need help with this process, consult with me. This is what people do. This is what the consultations are designed for. Keep maintaining this discipline, and you will then find that logic will start to prevail, and you are now conquering this second enemy, so that you now see no reason to remain, and your stated desire to get out will be fulfilled. How might you bring about this state of affairs? Well, you have to start by building your understanding by reading and listening. This develops your logic and provides you with material that your mind can go to instead of just finding emotional thoughts that will not help you. You must also, of course, go to the right information. And since you are here, you have already done that. You need to build a repository of material which your mind can access, which reminds you of what you're dealing with. There are also numerous techniques that you can utilize to adjust your thought process, but I will explain one to you now. One method is to find a totem, find an object. It might be a polished stone from the beach, it might be a lump of amethyst, a piece of jewellery belonging to someone special, an unusual coin, a stress ball. It can be anything so long as it fits into your hand. This then needs to be placed somewhere you will see it every day, on your nightstand, on the console table, by the front door, next to the kettle, next to the sink in the bathroom. Every day, you must take the totem and wrap your hand around it. Feel it in your hand and then ask yourself, I must go so. What would logic tell me to do now? Chances are that your first response will be a piece of emotional thinking similar to the ones that I've listed earlier. Halt the thought and assess it. Is this logic or emotional thinking? Put yourself in this moment of assessment. Recognize what it is. If, as expected, it is emotional thinking, then destroy that thought by working out what the logic is. You will find the logical thinking will appear quicker than you would imagine because you have been building your understanding. Do this every day around the same time. You will then find that when you have an emotional thought, you will recognize it to go to your totem, hold it, and reject the emotional thought and work out the logic. You may need to go to your totem 12 times a day, but steadily you are building your logic, reducing your reliance on emotional thinking, and then you will find you are doing it without needing to go to your totem because you are resetting your thinking. There are also further techniques that can be utilized, and that surrounds the no-contact regime and the reduction of your emotional thinking. The Knowledge Vault has packages which are specific to dealing with those matters. GOSO is important to adhere to. It is the only way of moving forward. Get out and stay out. impose your no-contact regime and stick to it. And I, with my material, will help you do this and embrace the success and freedom that many, many, many people have already achieved. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.